Radio Migrante every Sunday night from 9 to 10 p.m. on CHRY 105.5 FM.
And welcome back to Radio Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM. You may also listen to us at www.chry.fm and click Listen Live, Bell 5973, or at Rogers Digital Cable 945. So tonight here at Radio Migrante, we will discuss the case of a Dutch national, Thomas van Beersum, who went to the Philippines almost a month ago, and through the lens of this case, we will discuss the grave issues of foreign intervention and international solidarity as well. So, Nicole Oliver from ILPS executive member here in Canada, she is with us here tonight, and also Katrina Stuart Santiago, who is an opinion columnist of the Manila Times, co-author of The Filipino is Worth Blogging For, and a blogger at www.radicalcheck.com. And later tonight at the show, we will be speaking with Marie Boti, who is a filmmaker and activist and a longtime solidarity friend of the Filipino people. Okay.
And all right, so hello, Katrina. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Good morning.
Good morning. Good evening.
Where you guys are.
So to everyone on the show today, let's just make it conversational, and the questions that we ask, we can ask each other, and anyone can reply. So let's start off with the basics. So I already talked about at the top of the show how this case was basically started with that viral photograph, and then it exploded to him being Thomas van Beersum being deported and all that. Maybe from the Philippines end, Katrina, can you talk a little bit about this case? What happened there?
I think though that before it exploded quickly via that photo, what really happened was that one, he had an open letter. So not only did we have a name, we had a voice, and it is very clear suddenly where he stood in the context of a rally that had such that the public opinion was so diverse about. It was so divided about whether or not that Sona rally should have happened to begin with. So that the moment we had that image of Thomas screaming at that cop, then it became a more complicated discussion. And then we had him write that open letter to the cop, which I don't think a lot of people quite read or understood, because it was also very clearly standing on a side that public opinion was against. And then the added layer was that we had that image of the crying cop. Mm-hmm. And because that image of the crying cop happened separate from the image of Thomas with him. In the beginning, there was just the crying cop image. And then people started putting it together and thinking, okay, there's the image of the crying cop. And then now we have this image of Thomas screaming at him. And then we have that open letter by Thomas to this cop. And then we can just all gang up on Thomas for making the cop cry. So that even when it became clear that the cop had not cried because of Thomas, even when he had been interviewed, and even when he had said that in fact he had cried because, you know, he didn't want to be there, he was from elsewhere, this was his first time doing a Sona rally, he was hungry, he hadn't had any sleep, and that was why he was crying. No one really picked up that story anymore, because it was easier to just gang up on this white boy who the world had seen through that photo was screaming at this cop. So it was really a more complicated process of ganging up on him that happened, at least as far as social media was concerned. Mm-hmm. Because it would be much, much later, well, at least a couple of days after that mainstream media, television, and the newspapers would pick it up. All still quite siding with that crying cop. Mainly because that Sona rally was not allowed to happen. So mm-hmm. that the premise of the discussion was always, well, they didn't have a permit. So none of them had the right to be there, least of all a foreigner.
Mm-hmm. So why the attention media focused on Thomas and not really on the issues that Filipino people are facing and have been facing, like the issues that was raised by the people's organizations at the State of the Nation rally address, and of course with the recent human rights conference in the Philippines. So why to him and not to the bigger picture, which is those two that I mentioned?
Well, it was easier. I mean, I think Pinoy social media, if you're part of it, if you keep track of it, you pick an image and you stick with it, you run with it. Thomas was the easier point of discussion. And certainly it could have gotten any media enterprise, any media person could have actually taken the story of Thomas and gone deeper. Exactly. Anyone could have just, read what he wrote and ran with it also and discussed the depth of his presence here and discussed the reasons why he was here, discussed the reasons for the Sona rally the reasons why the Sona rally is important. Certainly those were things that any media enterprise could have done. But it's not something that's, number one, it's not something that's easy for them to do. Number two, there's also the fact of bandwagon. Pinoy social media it's so strong on bandwagon. On, you look at what's trending on Twitter, you look at what people are sharing on Facebook, and then, any online presence of a mainstream media company would just go with the trend, and it just becomes difficult to go against that. So, which is why there are very few bloggers, there were very few of us who actually were very clear about why we were all siding with the Sona rally to begin with, and why there should not have been a problem with Thomas being there. But that is never a discussion that we like to have. Mm-hmm. And again, from the beginning, that Sona rally public opinion was already so against it because they disallowed it from happening.
So let's actually
because
talk
they
about...
did not give it a permit. Let's
talk about the Sona rally quickly. What was the Sona rally about this year? Just highlight a couple of the issues that were brought out. And also, we read that Thomas was part of the International Human Rights Conference there that had many international delegates from all around the world. And really, they only highlighted Thomas. So maybe briefly, you can talk a little bit about what the Sona was bringing up, what the rally was bringing up. What were their issues?
I wasn't actually at the rally, but but the issues these are long drawn out issues that we've had against, Aquino's regime in particular. So the human rights violations, there's the fare hikes, there's the privatization of hospitals and public services, there's the 125 across the board wage increase that we have yet to be given. These are issues that there's the oil price hike, etc., etc. And these are issues that throughout the year, activists have been, talking about. These are issues that we, even if you are not activists, would know are making us all, live more difficult lives. But these are issues that we don't really like talking about, particularly when it's Sona season, because we have this whole thing about trying to give this president a chance or trying to be more positive about the state of the nation. And I think to some extent that Sona rally was really a moment where because it was disallowed from happening, it was suddenly clear where people stood about it.
Yeah, this is as far as I know, is it the first year that the permit hasn't been given?
It is, yes. Yeah. It's the first year it wasn't given. Which is why from the beginning my stand was that if you had allowed it to happen, that violence would not have happened to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
There should not have been a problem.
And the violence, I saw photos online. I saw, an old man who's a member of one of the organizations there that was truncheoned on the head. Yeah. And I didn't see any of that in the mainstream media. And so I think it's really interesting the way this is being spun. And I'd like to ask Nicole, because Nicole spent 6 months in the Philippines with interning, I believe, with Gabriela for her schoolwork here, and you were a part of the Sona protest. Was it last year?
Yes, last July I was I attended the Sona as a member with Gabriela as a delegate.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you saw that experience. And you talk. I remember at the car you told me that you saw, the police were violent against the protesters.
Yeah. Actually, the beginning of the protest, it was really amazing. Leading up to it as well with Gabriela and Bayan and the other people's organizations, there was a lot of educationals going into the different communities from Tondo and other underprivileged communities across Metro Manila, talking about these issues and across the Philippines as well. And kind of that arousal of, let's talk about what's going on in our country. What are we hearing? What are you seeing in your community? And then, do you want to participate? And having these collective, atmosphere of that collectivity, of that there is, really strength in our numbers, that we can come together as people to have our voices be heard when we feel we've been silenced in other ways. And that was really positive to see all the artwork, to see thousands of women, some of the Gabriela women that I'd worked with that had been victims of domestic abuse, and are now survivors taking to the streets fighting for their communities. It was actually really incredibly empowering and inspiring, and to see the different performers that get up and stage and sing and the different creativity coming out of it. It was, nothing that I ever experienced in Canada as someone interested in human rights activism. So that was really positive. But then, there was a moment in the rally that it did turn violent, where I was surprised as someone, I saw these lead pipes coming in the air and I thought it was going to be tear gas, but I was really surprised to see it actually being lead pipes and rocks. I myself was struck in the ankle and was bleeding. One of the Spanish interns, she was knocked over and her shoe was lost, and she was knocked over with other Gabriela women, and there was quite a few injuries, and that was hard to see and hard to be a part of. When you see the power and the strength of coming together and the beauty that can come out of art and that type of collectivity, and then to have your own state in the police who are supposed to protect you and to help, the role that the police are supposed to play here in Canada and elsewhere is to help keep things peaceful and to help protect the protester. To see that turn against us, that was quite disheartening.
And as a foreigner, a foreigner from Canada in the Philippines during that time period, were you concerned about taking part in this rally or being a witness to this rally? What do you see as the role as a foreigner in the Philippines during moments like this?
Yeah, before the rally happened, Bayan had collected other foreign delegates that were there doing solidarity work, such as myself, and we were briefed on the law that the foreigners aren't to participate in these types of demonstrations in the Philippines, which is a little different because from my perspective, I think it's a fundamental human right to be able to take to the streets and to be able to engage in direct action and protest and vocalize your views. And I guess we kind of have to play more of a supporting role. For me, that was helping with some first aid when things did happen, helping hand out food to the Gabriela women, because many of the Gabriela women that participate, they can't afford food if they're taking a day off work to be there. So it was more doing things like that, playing a kind of a supporting role in being there and not taking, this direct role. Or I wasn't the one up on stage yelling into the microphone or dancing, even though much as I love to dance, I was there to play more of a supporting role.
So Katrina, let me bring it back to you. Can you tell us a little bit about this law? Because I tried to look it up. I don't know much about it. How does this law work, and how has it been used in the past, and is it used often?
I think this is the first time in recent history, at least as far as I know, that it's been used against any foreigner who's been at a rally. It's rarely invoked, really. So it was a surprise that it was a surprise, at least to me, that it would be something that they would take against Thomas. What was even more surprising was that it wasn't something that meant they had to search for him or find him and arrest him right away. Instead, it was something that they thought only required that they wait for him to get to the airport when he was actually already willing to leave. There was that span of time of about 2 weeks, I think, or a little less than that, when Thomas was just, a free man and didn't seem to have committed any crime. So that when I realized that he had been detained at the airport, even when he was ready to leave and he had a ticket, I realized that they were actually invoking that law again, which didn't quite, make sense. Just because he was about to leave, there was no reason to think him undesirable alien at that point. And because had he been undesirable at that point, he should have been undesirable at the moment, from that moment when they saw him in those photos at the Sona. But I think it was it's a weak case to begin with. And it was really just, I think it was more a power trip that they could only fulfill by the time they got to him at the airport. But the law itself is not something that we hear on any given day about or against foreigners engaging in issues or engaging in discussions about local issues and, human rights, etc., etc. And you have to realize that Thomas was here for that conference. And he was here with so many other foreigners. And yet they weren't considered undesirable aliens, or they weren't considered to have been intervening in local politics.
Mm-hmm. So I went back to the Philippines last year, and also with a fellow Canadian. I'm a Filipino. I was born and raised in the Filipino, but now I'm a Canadian citizen. Mm-hmm. So I went back with a fellow Canadian, and that person spoke in a specific rally. So for me, how would we see this as Filipinos who are no longer Filipino citizens but now Canadian citizens, as well as for other people like foreigners as well who are non-Filipinos at all? So how do you think would we see this now?
And is this do you think they're going to have to rethink? Basically the question is, if a Filipino or a foreigner wants to go back to the Philippines and does take part and does speak at a rally, because this has happened in the past, how does this development play into that?
Would this be safer? How?
Well, I think it becomes a little more complicated. I think that, given this country, if you were a foreigner and you actually looked like a foreigner, then, I would tell you to just be a little more careful. As a matter of if you actually want to get back here, to come back and do more work here. I think that cameras will now be trailed on anyone who goes to a rally and anyone who looks foreign and actually goes to a major rally. And I think that it will become easy to just, zero in on a foreigner's image, anything that's captured, no matter that it's out of context, and to look at it as something that is related to what has happened to Thomas. I think the Filipino Americans, the Filipino Canadians, the ones who look Filipino, will get away with, just coming here and being with us and talking to us without people questioning nationality. It's all, you have to realize that it's all very superficial when you think about it. And Pinoy social media is very superficial. And that was a superficial, it was premised on the superficiality of Thomas's white skin. That wasn't, that would have been a totally different discussion had it been a Filipino-Canadian.
That was actually
who has gone through that.
It's a good lead into the next question, because I was going to read you some comments from online, because it's been very interesting to read the online comments about this case. And so stemming from what you just said, here's one from Facebook. It basically says, and I'm changing a couple words because we can't say it on air, so quote, "This white monkey should be deported immediately and perpetually banned from re-entering this country." Why do you think there's so many race-based insults coming out of this? And,
because Filipinos are racist, and we just like to deny it. But it's when we shoot from the hip, and when we do not understand, we don't really understand anything beyond an image, then it becomes easy to side with the with the Filipino cop and just go all racist against the white boy who looked like he had made the Filipino cop cry. That's really a very false sense of nationalism right there. I mean, it's exactly the same for even more superficial. Like, I don't know if you guys know of like last night there was a championship game between the Philippine team in basketball and the Iranian team. And people, because we lost to Iran, just went all racist on them. And that's Pinoy social media for you. It's a racism that comes out when we get pissed at something, when we can't handle something, when we lose at something. And I think in this instance, the general consensus was we were siding with the Filipino cop. Who made that cop cry? It was so easy to point a finger at the white boy. And so that's just the way the discussion has gone and apparently has continued for many Filipinos also.
But it could also be, I think, a sign of the frustration, maybe, of Filipino people, right? Where this race-based anger is the only way that they can feel to complain, maybe? I don't know. It's just something that I was thinking.
Maybe, but it's also, it's anger that's misdirected. Particularly in general, but particularly in Thomas's case. It was misdirected anger because he was in fact speaking for every Filipino who was taking a stand against him. He was in fact here to talk about our rights. He was here to talk about our right to a better government. He was talking about our right to live better in a country that he doesn't even belong to. And so when you think about it, anyone who actually took a stand against him, he was taking a stand for. And so it's misdirected anger. It's because you do not understand what is your relationship with Thomas as an activist, as a foreign activist, as a white activist. And it's that lack of understanding that makes that kind of anger just racist. It falls back on the more superficial and stereotypical assessments of situations. And that's really what happened to Thomas here as well.
Yeah, picking up on that comment, Katrina, we posted a blog entry on the Facebook page, and I would just read an excerpt of it. It's titled "Thomas the White Commie." Communist. So basically, it's not just about the race. It says there. So I'll read. Quote: Had he been just a white guy, it would have been a little bit more okay. Had he been just a communist, we would have lumped him along with the Saturo Campos and the Teddy Casinos of the world, whose nuanced beliefs are easier to lump together as quote-unquote communist. But no, Van Beersum is a white communist who talked with a certain self-exiled political demagogue in Utrecht. That was his crime and our crime too. Not only did we expose ourselves to the people prone to the most blatant and unrepentant forms of racism, but we also exposed ourselves as haters of anything that inconveniences us, bearing red tags for each and every single one of them if need be. Can you give a comment on this? Probably you or Nicole here.
Nicole can go first.
Yeah, I mean... Sorry, I was telling me to speak in the mic here. Okay, well, I think it's funny because in Canada, I find as someone who has particular political views in terms of human rights, I get labeled a tree hugger, or which is kind of funny. But in the Philippines, it's instead of a tree hug, and here that kind of is like softening the blow and trying to like devalue what I have to say. But in the Philippines, it's more, well, you're a communist, and that's actually a much more dangerous accusation as well. But again, it's a kind of trying to devalue views from the left in a certain way, and I guess putting that kind of red label on Thomas, making him seem more dangerous, is to try to heighten what's actually going on. And I think that's probably a little bit unfair. But also what I think too, maybe some of the worry comes not from him being a communist, but maybe people's backs in the Philippines got a little, or people were a little on edge because maybe him, you said Thomas was speaking for the Filipino people. And I think when you stand in solidarity, you shouldn't speak for someone or assume their voice. You can help share their views and their stories, but to speak for the Filipino people, I think that's maybe, you know, it's trudging on kind of that white savior territory. And I think maybe that might be a little bit more of some of the worries that people were trying to express, perhaps. Maybe Tito Alex wants to comment as well.
No, I got Tito. No, I don't want to comment as well. That's why I get to host the show. But actually, what I do want to do is move on, because we are down to the last 6 minutes. And so I want to move this to another comment, again, from Facebook that I grabbed. And this says, quote, "When our government asks for support from the U.S., it's called U.S. imperialism, and the government a crony of the imperialists. But when the activists get support from non-Filipinos, it's called international solidarity. Go figure," end quote. And so I want to bring this to the difference between international solidarity and foreign intervention. So this is to both of you, both to Nicole and Katrina. What does it mean to have international solidarity? And what does it mean to have foreign intervention? And is what happened in this case an example of that? And if not, maybe we can give an example of foreign intervention. Katrina, you can go first. Nicole does mine.
I was hoping Nicole would go first.
Before you tell her to go first.
I think that first, I agree that the thing about saying that he speaks for. I'm sorry if that seemed to be careless, but I think that in terms of international solidarity, I think that, you know, when I was actually an organized activist, it was always very clear to me why it was important that we engaged with, that we learned from, not just activists, not just foreign activists, but Filipino activists who are elsewhere in the world. And I think that that kind of solidarity is something that allows us to learn more about how things are being done elsewhere in the world, how these things are tied together into a very intricate web of relationships among nations and among organizations, where we are allowed to imagine that we are not alone in relation to the struggles that we actually engage in, the issues that we fight for. To me, international solidarity was always about being able to talk to someone and realizing the potential for continued struggle, given whatever work we do in the Philippines and given the state of the nation that we know exists in this country. I think intervention is really just, you know, having the U.S. bases come back. Intervention is when you know that even when a government will not mention the U.S. in its decisions, you know that part and parcel of every decision is born of an American company coming in, or American money coming in. And that's intervention because that's money coming out to them as well. It isn't money that goes around this country anymore. It's not it's not us owning this country anymore. And to me, that's intervention that's more difficult to explain, and it's intervention that we would rather not discuss, because it would be so easy to just say, oh, you're just being so communist about it. And that's going back to the question of red baiting. And this is why it was easier to zero in on Thomas, because we didn't want to go through the more difficult discussions that any rally, and particularly the Sona rally, demanded. We didn't want to discuss the more important things. We didn't want to go deeper into issues, because that would mean actually agreeing that foreign intervention is what has made this nation the way it is, which is dependent and poor.
Yeah, Katrina, another common refrain online is that the Philippine left focuses too much on the U.S. and not China. So there's one particular comment is, quote unquote, wala silang reaksyon sa unti-unting pananakop ng China sa atin at parang natutuwa pa sila. Any reactions on that?
it's really there's a lack of understanding. No, it's just, I mean, again, it's because it's superficial. This whole anti-China discussion is on mainstream media, and if this is what we see online as comments, then this is telling of the kind of discussions that we have on mainstream media. That's about it, which is why it's so easy to just think, to parallel it with the US, say, and think it's also imperialism without really having a sense of what those terms mean and the history behind the relationships that we have with both China and the US. It's superficial. It's really the way Pinoy social media has functioned in this country. It's noisy, it trends, it goes global, but it's superficial.
And it's timely as well, that comment, because just this last week I was reading in the paper that there's that new warship has just come in from the U.S. There's talk between the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and the Philippine military for increasing, the military exercises, the drones that are going to be there to protect, to quote unquote protect the Scarborough Shoal. Which may or may not be used for the Scarborough Shoal. But let's give a word to Nicole. Same thoughts. International solidarity, foreign intervention. How do you see this?
Yeah, I think international solidarity, it's always being conscientious of the power dynamics, whether it's privileges or disadvantages, and always trying to work through that together and operating on a power with level. It's not going in as, for me, a foreign or white savior, but always wanting to get on the power with level and recognize that there can be dual power shared between those that I want to work with, and recognizing that there will be challenges, but it's not, I think sometimes, in terms of doing solidarity work and people's movement work, it's kind of that more on the ground and sharing our knowledge and having it kind of be this exchange that's built on mutual respect and reciprocity, where, I think foreign interventionism, if we want to think at things through like more an NGO world where there's things like aid and charity work being done, and is that really changing the power dynamics, or is that where someone's coming in with goods or money and just kind of giving it away and not really letting there be any empowerment within communities? And that's kind of more of an interventionism that can come through, say, US aid. It's just giving food or money, but then not actually genuinely changing the power dynamics and empowering communities so they can be self-sustaining. And I think that's a form of interventionism that and I think that's the very difference here.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time. So thank you so much to both of you, and we'll hopefully have you both back in the future. So we're going to go to break, and then after this, we have Marie Boti, who's going to talk about their upcoming film, The End of Immigration, that's going to be showing next weekend. So thank you for listening to Radio Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM.
Live via phone patch is Marie Boti, who is a filmmaker and activist and longtime solidarity friend of the Filipino people. Hello, Marie.
Hello, Rhea.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So let's talk about a little bit about...
let's go directly to the end of immigration. And give us an introduction. What's going to happen? Because it's happening next week at the Mabuhay Festival, yes?
Yes, it's happening at the Mabuhay Festival, and it's at the Harbour Front. It's at a very nice and well-known venue in Toronto, and I guess it's organized by the Philippine Independence Day Committee. We were very pleased to see that they selected our latest documentary called "The End of Immigration" to show there, and I think that it shows that it's of interest to the Filipino community, but also to the broader community, since it touches on issues of migration, which are very current and affect almost everybody.
Yeah, so talk a little bit. We have 5 minutes to talk about this. So, talk about the film. What do you mean, the end of immigration?
Well, it's the end of immigration ? And the question mark is important because it's meant to be a kind of a provocative title, because of course everybody, when they see that title, say, what? How can that be? Because on the contrary, we see more and more people coming over as immigrants. We know that Canada is a land of immigrants. And so, what do we mean by that title? So it was made, or we thought of it in order to solicit that to pique curiosity. But at the same time, we do believe, and this is what we illustrate in the film, is that there is an end to immigration now in Canada. The immigration of the form that we knew it, and that our parents experienced it when they came to Canada 50 years ago. There's been a major sea change taking place in the past decade or so, since about 2002, since the Immigration Act was reformed, which is shifting from a policy of bringing in more and more landed immigrants and permanent residents to opting for temporary foreign workers to do the work that needs to be done on a daily basis in Canada. And we thought this was very disturbing because it's creating a two-tiered society, and we thought that we felt that we had to ring alarm bells about this, because it was heading in a direction which we as Canadians thought was unhealthy and was unjust and unfair, and not the kind of society that we think that most Canadians even would want if they were informed about the situation. So that's what the film intended to do, is to shed light on this policy, which is a creeping government policy, which is there, but has not been announced, has not been debated, and it's not something that is being undertaken with the full awareness of even the population at large. So, generally we've been showing the film. It came out about 6 months ago. We've been showing it across Canada in various cities, to various fora. It's been shown on French television, on Radio-Canada, and people are generally shocked, to see what we show in the documentary, because as I say, it's not something that has been announced or that people are generally aware of.
Yeah, I myself, when I saw this, I was quite shocked to see a couple clips that were really shocking. I remember this one time, this gentleman was talking about how he was working as a temporary worker at McDonald's, and this is something I don't think most Canadians know about, that so many of the Filipinos, and not just Filipinos, that are coming to the country now aren't coming in as immigrants, right? They're coming in as these temporary foreign workers, and they're working these jobs that we think are jobs that kids would do when they were younger.
Yes.
Anything else you can hint at? And
Well, the thing is that this is what the revelation was, because people have now become accustomed to, for example, having seasonal agricultural workers coming from abroad to work in the fields and in the packing plants. And this has been going on, even though it was a temporary policy. The seasonal agricultural workers policy has been going on for 40 years now, but people have kind of grown accustomed to that, so they think it makes sense because it's seasonal work, therefore to bring in people temporarily sounds like it makes sense, right? And then same with the live-in caregivers, the live-in caregiver program. That's been around for a number of years as well. But the thing with the live-in caregiver program is that at the end of 2 or 3 or 4 years, once people have put in their time as temporary, live-in help in Canadian homes, they can apply for permanent status. Now, the difference with this new program, which is taking over across the board in all sectors of the economy, is that there is no permanent residency at the end of it, and it's been designed to prevent people, ordinary workers, from becoming permanent residents in Canada. And it's a very mean-minded and mean-spirited policy, which wants, which is bringing people in to squeeze as much as we can out of them, and then to send them back when they're no longer needed, or when a new batch can be brought in to work perhaps even more cheaply. Or it's a policy that seems to be designed to keep workers in a vulnerable situation where they cannot be established, they cannot be fully aware of or have access to their rights, and it's just an easier way of exploiting people. So we think it's quite shameful, and that's why we made the film.
And speaking of exploitation, Marie, I've seen your film as well. You talk about the commodification of the labor force, and that there is this other, now that they put the skilled worker class on hold, and that it's now called the Canadian experience, that if you do your time and your workplace is willing to sponsor you, that's a new way of coming through, or a changed way, and then you're kind of at the whim or under the thumb of your employer, and what kind of power dynamic does that create? And I think that also was...
Yes, it's the whole thing across the board. It's an employer-driven system, and it's the privatization of immigration, as we say in the film, because it's basically handing over to private employers the choice of who is going to come to Canada and for how long. So
and unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you there just so we can give final details about where it's going to be. So this is going to be next week, Saturday, August 17th at the Mabuhay Festival. It's a free event. The Mabuhay Festival is free, and this film showing is free. And the film is going to be shown between 5 and 7 p.m. Again, the film is called The End of Immigration. The filmmakers, Marie Boti, who we're speaking to right now, and Malcolm Guy will be there. The film will be shown between 5 and 6 p.m. and there'll be a question and answer period with the filmmakers between 7 p.m. And thank you so much for joining us, and thank you also for tying everything together today, because we started with talking about human rights in the Philippines and how the country remains impoverished, and the protests that are happening because of it. And you can see the ramifications with the migrants that are now having to flee the Philippines at about 4,500 people a day. And for anyone that's interested in learning more, I think this film would be a great introduction, and I hope to see everyone there next week. I'll be there. I think our other guests here will be there. And thank you again to Marie Boti on the phone right now. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. See you next week.
And see you next week. And thank you to everyone for listening to Radio Migrante this week on CHRO 105.5 FM.